my complete Jay Anson collection. Today on Typical Books, we're going to be talking about 666 by Jay Anson. You may recall Jay Anson from such horror greats as the Amityville Horror, and that's it, because he only wrote the Amityville Horror and then turned to writing 666, another house-involved supernatural story, and then he passed away. He actually passed away before this could come out. This is a posthumous release from Jay Anson. The Amityville Horror book that spawned the movie and spawned all of that interest. Ed and Lorraine Warren were definitely involved, but it was Jay Anson that really made Amityville and Ocean Avenue a household name. At least in my household, anyway. And many others. I don't know how many people have actually read this. I've seen a few reviews online that talked about it being a little bit cliche, or people remembering they bought it when it first came out and haven't read it for years and have revisited it since. You can find it on Amazon, and there's some copies floating around on Abe Books. It is kind of a pretty book. I think it's pretty. Jay Anson's a handsome gentleman, or was. It's a very plain book, I think. It's old as dirt. And this book belongs to Dana Woodring. She likes tigers. It is a typical book with its little wraparound. It's very plain on the inside. Just would look nice on a shelf. You know, it does look nice on a shelf. Looks nice displayed, I think. It's very pretty. There weren't many other reprints of this that I've seen. This is the only cover in the hardcover I've seen. There's a book club version. I have no idea what it looks like. This could very well be it. I'm no expert. I found this as a used copy at Second and Charles when I visited Chris in Pennsylvania. So it's a very fitting purchase. And it was one of those things that I'd have never heard of. I walked past it in the stacks. That's the best way to organically find old horror. I love doing that in used bookstores. And it is copyright 1981 by estate of Jay Anson. And with acknowledgement and thanks to Tam Mossman for his editorial contribution to this work. So I assume that his wife or someone had found it among his work when he passed away and then submitted it. Not since Jay Anson's own bestseller, The Amityville Horror, has there been a terror shocker like this. A terror shocker. It's a terror shocker. I suppose for the time it was. It is Tuesday, April 10th, 1979. A nice young married couple, Keith and Jennifer Olson, arrive home at their house in Newcastle, New York, to discover that in the few days they've been on vacation, something unexpected and startling has happened. A house has mysteriously appeared on the vacant lot across from theirs. That's mysterious and startling to a New York couple, I suppose. 666 takes the reader into the world of evil that Jay Anson so brilliantly explored in the Amityville Horror, an evil that lies unsuspected behind the door of an ordinary-looking house, a house that reappears from time to time in any city, waiting innocently, invitingly, for someone to rent it, a house in which a dreadful, bloody, orgastic crime occurs again and again, bringing its victims screaming to the very brink of hell and into the hands of the devil himself. As Keith becomes more and more obsessed by the house, with its intricately carved beams that seem to have witnessed every human crime and its strange etched windows that glow with a malevolent light, Jennifer finds herself drawn to her friend David Carmichael, a handsome, self-assured man who is everything Keith is not. Inexorably, without their realizing that this is happening to them, their lives are being changed by a presence in the house, a powerful force who lets nothing stand in his way, and who at last appears to his victims in a heart-stopping scene of gruesome violence you will never forget. Compelling, believable, breathlessly paced, totally terrifying. 666 is a must-read for anyone who read or saw the Amityville Horror, or has read the 7,000 trillion billion books that have come out about the Amityville Horror since. This novel follows Jennifer and Keith Olson, who live on Sunset Brook Lane at 712. This house that has appeared is at 666. And Keith soon finds a newspaper clipping of a place in Seattle that had a house that looked exactly like this new house across the road that was at 666 Bremerton Road in Seattle. So it's just very odd to him, and he notices these things because he's an architect type person. He's a handyman, a carpenter by trade. So he does pay attention to this sort of stuff and can recognize a house like anyone sort of can, especially if it's a cookie cutter sort of house. You sort of drive through those suburbs and see all those houses that look the same, but you see the pattern because you get used to like how they look and stuff like that. So he picks up on that right away, but sees that this was like a double murder and eventual incarceration of a man who didn't seem to be someone who was compelled to commit murder, but it was a crime of passion because he was worried that his brother-in-law and wife were getting busy. So the story progresses where David Carmichael, a friend of his wife Jennifer's, comes to live in the house very close to them. And it's kind of a neat arrangement, you know, it's the husband and wife and her best friend live nearby. You'd think that would be super fun. Yeah, end of story. That's it. No. Eventually, David does sort of overstep, and he starts to find some very mysterious things about the house. Keith has already been in the house a couple times, and he's actually being contracted to fix it up because moving it from Seattle to New York did create a bit of wear and tear, as you can imagine. But this is a supernatural house, so you'd think it would heal itself, right? But now they have to hire somebody to do that, I suppose. So it's an interesting sort of love triangle story going on with a supernatural element. And not unlike Amityville Horror, there is somebody getting slowly obsessed and possessed and angry, and they become sort of someone you think that could snap at any moment. A couple characters sort of fall into this feeling that is not strange to fans of Amityville Horror or the actual true news story. And that's one thing I really do enjoy about this, is that it is very similar in a lot of ways and entirely different. So don't think it is a retelling of Amityville that Jay Anson took on his own and completely fictionalized. It does have some very, very different beats. The only similarity is really a bit of the madness that has something to do with a house. It starts out with a false newspaper clipping, something that I don't see near enough, and I actually pulled that technique a little bit in Night Face, but that sort of was my homage to like Stephen King, who used to do that quite a lot. And there is a big Stephen King influence in this. It is 1980 proper, so it is 1980s horror. If you're after old classic 1980 horror that no one else has really read, this is a really good go-to. And there's been some reviews where they say it's a little bit cliche as far as 80s horror goes, but it was written in 1980, so, I mean, the cliches hadn't entirely begun. And those cliches sort of come out of a lot of the, you know, yellow paperbacks that were available, the Blood on Satan's Claw ripoffs that were being written over and over, sort of marrying this violence and these extreme sort of ideas to Gothic literature. And Stephen King is really a master of that. So there's a big influence, I think, in Jay Anson's 666. It's a shame that he passed away. When he did, I would have liked to see a few more books out of him if he was going to follow this bent and be the sort of horror author that he becomes in 666. So it's very highly recommended that way. If you had caught the film Abattoir that deals with a house, a little bit of a supernatural shape-shifting house, that has somebody who controls it, a mysterious figure. This has a lot of those elements too. So if you're enjoying that sort of resurgence of 80s feeling horror that's happening in film right now, and a little bit in books, although the bizarro and extreme seems to be kind of taking over it. Similarly to Abattoir, there is a mysterious man that owns the house, Mr. Cost, who no one really meets, and he's this mysterious figure that Keith gets really excited about trying to learn more about. And that becomes part of the chase as well, is learning more about this house, more about the murders that took place in this house, and trying to like sort of drive a wedge between his wife and her gentleman friend, David. So it's pretty interesting that the character of Keith is such a typical 80s horror trope almost. I hate using that word. I hate using the words cliche and trope when it's dealing with a book that came out in 1980, right? 1981, actually. But he is such an interesting character because there's these things in 1980s horror where everybody is, you know, moving to the countryside to get away from the big city. That happens a lot in film and TV and books these days too. And I don't know what it is, that everything is going to be solved by moving to the countryside, and everything gets unbelievably worse moving to the countryside, because that's where all the crazy people, the killers and the Satanists all live, I suppose. Or the Satanists have moved from the big city into the countryside. Not really sure why that was such a thing, because the countryside is idyllic, you know? It truly is, and that's what they're going there to move for and get away from all the evils of the city. They're trying to show that the city isn't so evil after all. I'm not sure. Everyone also has cash to splash. Jennifer Olsen in this is a interior decorator, so she makes good money, or she did when she lived in New York. So that creates sort of that tension between the two of them, because she had to move away from the big city. And David is a antiques collector of some sort. So he has old money as well, and he has cash to splash. They all do. And that's one thing that makes the suspension of disbelief sort of tried, because people just don't really live like that on a day-to-day basis. And when they're trying to be passed off as just regular people that drive Toyotas. Stephen King was much better at that, I think, at making them believable, especially when people would have money worries. These people have no money worries. And it does make it a little easier because they can sort of do whatever they like, but it does have you suspend disbelief, especially when she's mostly out of work and his carpentry is struggling. So he's very worried about keeping contracts, right? Like any good satanic panic themed horror story from the 80s, Keith has a brother, Paul, who is a priest, and he comes to visit. So that makes it kind of interestingly Exorcist / Amityville Horror, Rosemary's Baby, everything sort of boiled into one, coming out at all that same sort of era. Very enjoyable read if that's your shtick, if that's a thing that you like. You like supernatural horror that is placed in the real world. You like this big city, small town kind of tension going on. You like this love triangle thing. You like these elements of madness. Then 666 is definitely a really good choice that way. I enjoyed it. Some people would say cliche or boring or strangely paced, and you know, all of those little cons to it. I find the pace is just fine. I find that the writing is passable, definitely. It's better than a lot of the independent things that I've read in the past 10 years. It's better than a lot of leisure books and Dorchester things that had come out in the past 20 years. Hell of a lot better written than a lot of things that are passed off as very well written and very popular horror, I find. So I'm not sure what these other people are reading that make this not sound as good to them. I'm not really sure. But I enjoyed it. I found the writing not bad at all. Not bad at all. If you enjoyed the Amityville Horror and that sort of pace, that sort of delivery, that sort of theme, and the writing of Jay Anson, then you'll definitely enjoy 666. 666 by Jay Anson. It is a typical book.